There's a lot of talk about attachment styles when it comes to dating and relationships, but what is rarely discussed is capacity and how somebody's level of capacity is ultimately what determines whether or not they can be with you for real, regardless of what kind of attachment wounds they may have. Let me explain. Capacity is a measurement of how likely this person is to hold the connection. It doesn't matter what their attachment style is. You can be an avoidantly attached person with high capacity, and you can be an avoidantly attached person with low capacity. Ultimately, the capacity one has is what determines whether or not they can actually hold the connection. Now, there's two ways to determine what level of capacity the person has: intimacy and friction. When you get close to a person, when emotional intimacy is being cultivated, when there's a bit of vulnerability to the connection, people with low capacity tend to run. But they don't just run, they stay gone. They never get back to baseline. And getting back to baseline is what determines how much capacity the person has. For example, a low capacity avoidant may run when things get a little too real, and then they just never return. They always stay distant. But a high capacity avoidant may take time to regulate and then return to the connection. That's what you're ultimately testing for. Now, the other way to test somebody's capacity is friction or conflict. When things are not so smooth sailing, when there's a bit of a disagreement in the connection, that is another doorway to which you can test the capacity of the individual. Now, with these two things in mind, you can see that the mistakes many people make when their connections, right? People try to stay in the casual zone for too long, and that never introduces intimacy to the connection. So the capacity for the individual is never tested. There are other people who are a bit too performative in their connections. They tend to brush things under the rug. They never add any element of friction to the connection, and thus the capacity is never tested on that end either. In other words, a lot of people, because they are trying to make things too smooth sailing, don't test the capacity of the individual they're with, and they end up wasting long periods of time before ultimately discovering their level of capacity after they've gotten too invested. I was just talking to a young lady who dated a guy for 7 months, and she kept sweeping things under the rug. She never wanted to have any conflict with him. And when she finally did have conflict with him, he determined that he wasn't ready for a relationship. Had she introduced conflict earlier into the connection, she would have probably found out around month 2 that the capacity wasn't there, right? I've also noticed a pattern that women tend to be tested by intimacy, getting close. A lot of my fellas have determined that when they actually want something with a woman, that's when she kind of freaks out and runs. That's her capacity tester. And men tend to get freaked out by conflict. They want things to be easy going. Obviously, that's just a general blanket observation, but there is truth to that. In short, the number one way to test capacity in your dealings with the opposite sex is to be authentic, to stop being so performative, to stop holding back, to be a bit messy, to be authentic. And in doing so, you will reveal how likely this person can actually hold the connection with you. And if you need help with that, DM me the word coach and I'll be in touch.